Hello once again, everyone, and in preparation for Yeehaw 2024, I have returned to the table of Legos to go over our different scenarios. Now, this year is a little bit different than last year. The two main things is, of course, we are dropping the guided scenarios, meaning that rather than it being divided between guided and more open-ended like we have in the past, I'm very confident with how people have been playing, even with newcomers coming in. And so I think that we can go ahead and make slightly more complex objectives and a little bit more open-ended fights. So the other division, of course, is that to save energy as well as emphasize certain kinds of combat, we are going to have two joint scenarios. That means that everyone is on the field at once. We have two armored scenarios where you are expected to be in at least 3/4 harness, that being you're really only missing one piece, and hopefully that one piece is just like your greaves or something along those lines. And then we have two lightly armored scenarios where the most armor on the field will probably be at least still half armor, but it's meant to encourage people who are on the lighter side of things. And I wouldn't be surprised even if those playing light choose to ditch some pieces for those scenarios. But I won't be showing all of them today. Some of them are relatively similar to what we've done in the past, and or just you don't need that much visual representation. I'll see if I can't put a graphic for all of these in the write-up that should accompany this video. But showing out here is our first of the armor-specific scenarios, and as you may have guessed, this is Agincourt. So the idea here will be, of course, we have the smaller contingent of defending English against the larger contingent of dismounted approaching French, and two groups of archers that will be firing upon the approaching French. So, the way this one will work is that we wanted to give the situation of prolonged fire, but of course with the Dorp arrows against lighter armored targets, that's a little bit more dangerous because getting hit in the side or in the back would be very bad if you're just in fencing gear. Armor, it's really not that bad. So, basically, the attackers will advance from, of course, further back than this, all the way across this field under prolonged fire until they cross this line. Now that line should bring them directly into conflict with the English foot, but once you're past that line, you do not need to worry about getting shot anymore. We're not going to be firing into melee, but up until that line, so for example, if your line stops and you're still on this side, you are free game. So you'll be shot at quite a bit, and I'm imagining that probably you'll set yourselves up in such a way that the armor is more toward the exterior with some of your more squishy guys on the interior. But to be fair, everyone should be in a lot of harness, so we will see what happens there. Now, this should go for a decently long time because I'm going to add lives. So the attackers will have 3 lives. The defenders will only have 2, meaning that if you get hit, you can return back to your side. And if you want to be extra safe, you can bail out to the side so you won't be worried about getting hit by a stray arrow. Respawn by touching a point, then come back. And it will probably end up going in waves, so you won't have little trickle in people as it goes. The English, meanwhile, they get to kind of respawn where they are. They only have to go a little bit of ways and then come back, but with less lives, they'll go away sooner. And when eventually the archers run out of arrows, they will be allowed to don their fighting equipment. So the fight will not pause during this time, though, so this will still be going on. Don their fighting equipment and then join in with whatever hand weapons they have. Archers will only have 1 life, though, so if they get down, they're gone. And that should lead to a deciding factor by the end of it. We'll just kind of see what happens. It's meant to not perfectly replicate, but just simulate the idea of a prolonged fire, advance, and then, of course, having to deal with infantry once you get that far up. Should be a very interesting one. I'm really looking forward to seeing how this goes. And so for our next scenario, let me do a little bit of rearranging. So for our second scenario, the idea here is this is our first lightly armored scenario, and it's part 1 of a 2-part story. We will build a decently equipped mercenary force, so our condottieri's company. And the idea here will be that they will have, decent armor. We're going to take the people on the more armored side and put them together here, but not to the point that it's extreme. And then we'll also give them a contingent of archers. And the idea here will be is that they want to attack this village and steal the loot. So, the idea here, though, is that the village also has a bridge leading to it, so our peasant militia may try to defend the bridge, but of course, being able to just stand on the bridge won't last because the archers can fire. Now, the archers here are not allowed to cross the bridge. They have to stay on this side, and they'll have a smaller number of arrows than our last scenario, so they shouldn't be a huge factor for too long, just enough to maybe make a hole that the condottieri can cross the bridge. Now, for our loot bags, we're going to actually have weighted loot bags. These will be decently heavy, heavy enough that carrying them by yourself will prove a challenge if you're using a long arm, so you may need to set down your weapons to carry one. And there should be at least one or two that are heavy enough two people have to carry them. And the scenario will end when either the militia manages to rout the condottieri, or alternatively, they manage to secure all the loot. And for this, for lives, I haven't quite decided yet, but I'm thinking that our villagers will be not infinitely respawning, but a decent number, probably somewhere in the realm of like 3 to maybe even 4 lives, versus our attackers will only have perhaps 2. And this should be, a little bit of chaos. We'll see how the commander of the attacker's side and the commander of the defender's side manages to mount their respective actions. I'll also add a couple more things in the way. We'll have a brand new bridge facade, so we'll be able to make some further adjustments. We'll make the house a little bit larger and things along those lines, but should be nice and fun. And then let's look at our next scenario. Okay, so for our next scenario, this is part 2 of the lightly armored specific scenarios, and these won't be going back to back. It'll go, most likely, it'll go unarmored, armored, unarmored, armored. But the idea is that now the mercenaries have secured their loot and need to transport it, and this is unfortunately where my little dioramas really aren't doing the scale justice. So to add a couple pieces, this is representing an actual dry riverbed that is on the property we'll be fighting on. It's not a factor in this fight, but will be a factor in the next one. So basically around here-ish, there is a ramp that leads out of the woods. The idea will be that the mercenaries will start there with their bags of loot, and they can arrange themselves however they wish, and then the now attacking side, the remaining militia as well as some reinforcements, they can set themselves across the field however they wish, and they can attack in stages if they wish. Their goal is to kill as many of the mercenaries as they can and re-secure the loot. Meanwhile, for the mercenaries, their sole job is to hopefully get themselves and some of the loot to the top of the hill. And if that means that you abandon your comrades, drop and run, that's fine. If that means that a small contingent makes it, but the rest don't, or if that means that they have to ditch the loot in order to break out, that is also fine. It's that difficulty of keeping a control of a resource while under assault. And for this, most likely we will go ahead and let the attackers infinitely respawn, but we'll put their respawn points sufficiently back so that they have to have time to get back into the fight. The defenders, meanwhile, I am wanting them only to have 1 life. So, it should be a very interesting one, and I forgot to mention in the last one, but of course, with the more lightly armored scenarios, we're not using the lance format, so people can use shields or other such things, hand weapons, well, everything's a hand weapon, but, sidearms as well as main arms, and the only thing that won't be allowed is we will not be using any armor-killing axes during these lightly armored bouts, because it's expected that less people will have helmets, so just to be safe, we won't be doing that. But otherwise, you asked for a shield scenario, there is one of your 2 shield scenarios. Now, let me set this up for the big fight, and then we'll be done. And now for our final scenario, and once again, you must forgive me for my inability to perfectly render the entire field, but this is our big battle, or as I'm calling it, our objective battle. Essentially, each side will have 3 objectives presented to them. So let's go over them right quick. So the first and the most important is taking or holding the hill. And the hill is much more significant than this. There's also, the field is much wider than this. There are trees on this side, and basically you have a clear path or a more forested path to get to the top of the hill. And once again, we'll use the stump as the marker. So this side wants to hold the hill. This side wants to take the hill. Now, our next objective is located away from the hill is also the door set up across the bridge. In there, as you can see, is our noble. The game Capture the Noble was incredibly popular at first Yeehaw. We didn't get to bring it back for Yeehaw 2023, but this year it is happening. And the idea is that this side wants to rescue the noble and keep him alive. The noble is always in play for the whole scenario. This side, meanwhile, wants to kill or capture the noble. Capture is preferred, but kill is perfectly good enough. And then our final objective is, here's all that loot again, which has gotten caught out beyond the wire. Now, this arrangement requires a little bit of explanation. So remember I said that dry riverbed? It does curve around, so we're going to set it up so there's some barricades, like overturned wagons essentially, protecting the loot on the shore side. The dry riverbed itself, though, there's special rules involved with it, so we'll get there again in a second. But this little force will be trying to protect the loot. This side wants to secure that loot. This side, of course, wants to take that loot. The way you win this is that whichever side gets 2 of the 3 objectives complete is the victor. So, let's go over the specific rules within each scenario, and we'll start from farthest out. So when it comes to securing the loot, all you need to do is get rid of these guys, get that loot, take it back to your side, or alternatively come and relieve these guys and secure transport of the loot back. And like I said, there should be more field here, I just can't represent it. Now, the dry riverbed is not that deep. It's around about 5 feet deep, and it is grass in certain areas, so there will be a little bit of rock right here that will block off so you don't mess with it. The rule for the riverbed is we're pretending as though it does have water in it. So if you do not have leg harness and you are not carrying a main arm, so not a spear or an axe or anything along those lines, it has to be a sidearm, you are allowed to ford the river, and that's what these guys are doing. So your lightly armored people or your half-armored people ditching their main arm are allowed to cross the river, and our defenders, of course, will then have to deal with a fight on 2 fronts. Now, for the noble, his main rules is that he is allowed to sally out whenever he wishes, but of course, and he has a small household guard with him. He's allowed to sally out whenever he wishes. The fortress door that he's on doesn't have any intrinsic value necessarily, other than it being a respawn point. So once this is taken care of, we can just ignore this side of the field, but whoever holds the house can respawn their troops there. In regards to this side, if they manage to push the attackers back far enough, now they don't have to go all the way up to the hill to respawn. Meanwhile, this side, if they manage to push far enough that they can take that house, now they can just respawn across that bridge. So the house does have some defensive value, but not nearly as important as the guy inside it. He's welcome to sally out whenever he wishes, with the exception of when the scenario starts, he's not allowed to just sprint up the hill. Basically, from top down, I've tried to arrange it as best I can, but the hill and the door will be relatively close versus the loot is relatively close to the other side. So, of course, each side has a slight advantage toward each objective, but again, no just running for it. Now, the noble for being captured, that will be all in the write-up in regards to capture rules and things along those lines. And then, of course, if he's killed, he only has 1 life, gets hit, is out. So it does pay to be careful with your noble. Now, for taking and holding the hill, this caused a bit of confusion last year because people got a little bit caught up fighting and kind of forgot the objective. But for taking and holding the hill is relatively simple. Just keep the enemy force off of it. Taking it, meanwhile, what you need to do is you need to get enough of your guys up to the hill to the respawn point that you can surround it and hold it, preventing anyone from respawning on it. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be, hitting people who are coming up and are non-combatants. It just means once you got enough guys on there, if someone respawned, they wouldn't stand a chance, and that's how you can hold the hill. Now, once you have it, if there's still other forces in play, they are welcome to try and retake it, but if they're too spread out, then the hill is considered taken, and now, of course, you're holding it, and if the defending team does not have that other respawn point, they're done. So that should be really, really exciting. Our big battle, as you see, doesn't involve archers this year, but of course, our last 2 of our 3 scenarios do, so they'll get plenty of action. And the only scenario that we have not covered in this, well, the only 2 scenarios are the rank battle, which is exactly the same as we did it last year. It's a joint scenario where everyone will be playing at once just as kind of the warm-up. And then our combat of the 30 for our more armored folks, that will be in the write-up, but that doesn't really require that much of a visual medium. So, otherwise though, those are our 6 scenarios for H.A.W 2024. I hope you all are looking forward to it. I'm really excited to see how these scenarios play out, and in the write-up I will also explain a little bit more about these banners and officers as they'll be playing a bit more into it, but that's a bit long-winded for this video. So, otherwise everyone, thank you very, very much for watching, and we'll go over some other H.A.W specific things another time.